This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. The majority of videos in this series look at the competitive history of Magic and rank things based on how cards have performed at Grand Prix and Pro Tours. On occasion, though, I like to change it up a little bit, and that's what we're doing today. Today we're going to be looking at 10 cards that somehow made it to the printers despite having incorrect text or mana costs that received errata almost immediately as a result. Sometimes this can be something small, like a creature type. Other times the error that makes it into cards printed and put into booster packs is much larger. Before we get started with the list proper, I do want to mention one card that isn't on the list that I think most people probably think of in this category. I think talking about this specific card also helps me better convey what exactly I mean about cards that needed errata right away. So let's talk about Skullclamp. An utterly broken card, Skullclamp had to be banned within just a few weeks of being printed because in decks with lots of small creatures, it basically let you pay 1 mana to draw 2 cards. Wizards admitted they made a mistake here, but the reason it doesn't qualify for this list is because this wasn't an error where a card was printed with text different than was intended. Instead, the developers for Darksteel made a last-minute change to the card that made it incredibly busted. In other words, the people who designed this set wanted the text to say what it said, and that isn't true of the other cards on this list. Additionally, it didn't receive errata, instead it was just banned. And the text on the card still informs what the card does in every way. The text hasn't been changed at all. The cards on this list are functionally different from the original text printed on the card, no matter what format you play them in. Alright, with that out of the way, let's move on to our list. At number 10, I have a general group of cards, those that have been translated into other languages, but who are functionally different due to an oversight or error in translation. These cards are all corrected by the time they get printed, but they make it into the booster packs as functionally different cards. An example of this is Sunscape Apprentice, which in English is a fairly mundane card. Its second ability, which lets you put a creature you control on top of your library, is not usually going to be that good because it basically gives you card disadvantage. Maybe you can get some use out of it with a little help. However, the German version of Sunscape Apprentice actually lets you put any creature in play on top of its owner's library, which is obviously an incredibly powerful ability to put on a 1-drop. There are countless other examples of mistranslations affecting cards, which essentially results in those cards needing to be errated right away the minute they come out of the booster pack. At some point, maybe doing a top 10 on mistranslations in general would be an interesting place to go. At number 9, I have Glinthawk Idol. The errata that needed to be made here wasn't super serious, but it involves birds, so it's going to make my list. When originally printed, Glinthawk Idol only became a 2/2 artifact creature with flying. It had no creature type at all, and it had been decided by that point that creatures should all have creature types regardless of whether they were creature tokens or permanents that become creatures. So Glinthawk Idol was a serious outlier there. Bird is also one of the more common creature types in the game, so leaving it off of the card here was especially odd. It isn't like they couldn't figure out what type to give it. In the end, the creature type of bird was added to the card pretty quickly after the set came out, and on more recent printings of the card, like in Modern Masters 2015, it now carries the bird creature type. At number 8 is Impulse, a card which just wastes everybody's time if you do what it says. When originally printed in Visions, Impulse had you put the cards that you don't put in your hand on the bottom of your library, and then shuffle your library. They removed the shuffle part pretty quickly since it wasn't even functionally how they wanted the card to work, and because if they let the shuffle part of the card remain and the card ended up being played a lot, tournaments would have started taking a lot of extra time. Probably a good thing they fixed it because it did see a fair bit of play. At number 7, I have a Burrow Envoi. As originally printed, this Moonfolk could permanently decrease the power of creatures, which is a very powerful effect, especially in Limited. Imagine being able to pay 2 mana to essentially remove creatures from your opponent's board over and over again. Additionally, finding a way to continuously track what creatures a Burrow Envoi has shrunk and hasn't shrunk is a pretty difficult thing to fit into the game. Well, that obviously wasn't how they intended the card to work, and they very quickly made the change that it only lasted until end of turn, like most similar effects do. At number 6 is Darksteel Mutation, one of 2 different cards from Commander 2013 that needed immediate errata. The mistake here is sort of similar to Glinthawk Idol, but the implications of this mistake were a little larger. The flavor and intended purpose of this card was to take away everything from the creature that it gets put on, including creature type, and just making it a blank 0/1 insect creature with indestructible. As printed, the creature it was put on didn't lose the creature types it had already had, so if it was a goblin, now it was an insect goblin. Why is that important? Well, because static abilities from other creatures could still pump this goblin, or whatever creature type it was, meaning that in tribal EDH decks, you could still get some nice uses out of your indestructible insect friend with all the bonuses for creature types those types of decks run. And now the creature was also indestructible. The card was intended to take away all creature types too, so they quickly eroded it so that it did. At number 5, we have Invert Invent, the newest card to make the list. Specifically, the problem here was the invert half. Similar to a Burrow Envoi, the invert half messes with power and toughness, but the effect doesn't stop at the end of turn the way the card was printed. If it worked how it says it works on the card, the creature's power and toughness would stay switched forever. Like with the Burrow Envoi, this is the kind of thing that is incredibly hard to track across a game of Magic. This also would have made it much better in Limited, and may have perhaps even made it good enough to see some play elsewhere. Before the set even came out in this case, they eroded Invert so that it stopped at the end of turn, like most effects like it do. At number 4, we have Walking Atlas, another card with a mistake when it came to typing. Back in World Wake, there hadn't yet been a colorless creature who wasn't an artifact, but that's what Walking Atlas is according to its type line. This one is particularly funny to me because the very next set, Rise of the Eldrazi, would introduce the very first colorless non-artifact creatures. The mistake here actually briefly had Walking Atlas holding the title as Magic's first colorless non-artifact creature, and maybe it came about as a result of shifting cards around or something, like the Atlas was originally a random Eldrazi in Rise of the Eldrazi and they forgot to change the type. Either way, Walking Atlas was officially made an artifact shortly after the card was printed. And number 3 is Morass, Will of the Wild, the other card from Commander 2013 with an error in addition to Darksteel Mutation. And the mistake here is a lot bigger than Darksteel Mutations. As originally printed, you could actually pay 0 mana and 0 +1/+1 counters if you wanted to, which enabled a number of kind of broken things. For one thing, you could pay 0 mana over and over again to make infinite 0/0 elemental tokens. This is abusable in a world where you have a static effect, like Glorious Anthem to pump your whole team, or if you have an effect in play that does something every time a creature dies, since technically you make a 0/0 every time and it dies right away, so you get any death trigger bonuses. You could also technically target things and do 0 damage to them over and over again, which can also have some uses. This was a huge oversight when they designed Morass. This wasn't what they wanted it to do at all, and they quickly eroded Morass so that EDH decks with the Elemental Beast as their commander couldn't abuse those synergies, which they never intended in the first place. Now, Morass Oracle text explicitly states that X can't be 0 for all of the abilities, so Morass isn't nearly as broken as it is as printed on the card. At number 2, I have Orcish Oriflamme, who sort of stands in for a bunch of cards in Alpha that were misprinted. These weren't technically eroded right away, but that's because Wizards wasn't sure early on how to deal with the mistakes that were made in Alpha. Somehow or another, Orcish Oriflamme was printed for half the mana cost from what it was intended. It should have been 3 in a red, not 1 in a red. This error only appeared on cards from Alpha, and was corrected on cards from Beta onward, which came out just a couple of months after Alpha. Early on, Wizards realized this was a problem. Early rules said that if you had the 1 in a red version from Alpha, you could play it for that mana cost, and if you didn't, you had to pay the intended mana cost of 3 in a red. In the end, Wizards decided that a card-by-card basis like this wasn't a good idea, and they issued Errata for the Alpha version so that they could also be cast for 3 in a red only. This is a big deal because it was really the first time they eroded a card because of a printing mistake, something this whole video is about. At number 1, we have Hostagetaker, which is a very recent card, and the one I think I would argue has the biggest printing mistake on it that needed to be corrected by Errata. Hostagetaker is already a very powerful card. Leaving out a single word on the text of this one made it even more powerful. That word was another. By making it so that Hostagetaker could exile itself, and not only other creatures, it meant that it could exile itself, and then it was leaving play, so it made itself come back into play again. This might not sound important, but if combined with an Enter the Battlefield trigger, like that on Forerunner of the Coalition, which, by the way, could also help you search up your Hostagetaker, it meant that your opponent died on the spot from a fairly easy-to-assemble 2-card combo. Wizards apparently intended to have another on the card all along, but it made it to the printers without that text on it. Luckily, they made the change here immediately, and this combo was never a thing in Standard. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see some of the over 180 MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.